For 13 years, the trucks arrived every Thursday like clockwork. 7:30 in the morning, sometimes earlier, never much later. The drivers never stayed long. They backed up to the fence, raised the dump beds, unloaded piles of rough-cut white oak, and disappeared back toward the lumber yard. No conversation, no paperwork, just wood hitting the ground and engines fading down the road. Most people in the county assumed Garrett Hale hated those trucks. The noise, the dust, the growing mountains of timber that made his back pasture look like a salvage yard. He didn't hate them, not even close. Every Thursday morning, Garrett stood by the kitchen window holding his coffee, waiting. His heart beat a little faster when he heard the engine turning off the main road. He couldn't explain it to anyone. Not yet, not in words that would make sense to people who only saw crooked boards and bark, but somewhere deep in his chest he felt it, the quiet certainty that everyone else was looking at the wrong thing. They see waste, I see time, I see grain, I see what this becomes when someone finally pays attention. He walked out to the pile every single time, ran his hands across the rough surfaces, crouched down, turned a board into the light, and every single time something inside him whispered the same thing his grandfather once said. The tree already did the hard part. What happened next would turn a pile of rejected lumber into one of the most respected furniture businesses in the country, but nobody saw that coming, least of all the people who spent years laughing about it. If you love stories about ordinary people turning what others discard into something extraordinary, subscribe and join us. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's see how 13 years of rejected oak changed one man's life forever. The strange arrangement began in 1992. Garrett had recently inherited 85 acres from his grandfather, Samuel Hale. The property bordered the county lumber yard. At the time, that felt like a coincidence. Later, it would feel like fate. For years, the mill had struggled with one stubborn problem nobody could solve. Short offcuts, twisted slats, live edge pieces, wide boards too valuable to burn but too irregular to sell as dimensional lumber. Every week the rejects piled up. Hauling them to a landfill cost thousands. Burning them wasted perfectly good hardwood. Either way, the mill lost money on wood that deserved better. One rainy afternoon, the lumberyard manager knocked on Garrett's door. He removed his cap. He looked like a man about to ask a favor he didn't expect to get. "Afternoon," Garrett smiled. "Come in." Instead, the manager pointed toward the fence. "We've got a question." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mind if we dump oak behind your north pasture?" Garrett frowned. "Why, we're paying to haul it away. Thousands a month." Long pause. "If you've got room, it saves us the trip." Garrett looked across the pasture. The back corner stayed unused. Rocky ground. Poor drainage. Nothing had grown there in years. Nothing probably ever would. "How much wood are we talking about?" The manager laughed. "More than you'd believe." Garrett shrugged. "Fine." One word, one handshake. Neither of them realized they had just changed the next 20 years of both their lives. The first truck arrived the following Thursday, then another the next week, then another. The piles grew fast-crooked, uneven, odd-length bark still clinging to the edges, the kind of wood most people walk past without a second thought. Some neighbors called it junk, others called it firewood. Nobody called it opportunity, not yet. Samuel called it something else entirely. One evening when Garrett was 16, he followed his grandfather toward the growing piles. The sun was dropping low. The air smelled like rain and bark. Samuel walked slowly the way he always did when he was about to teach something without saying he was teaching. He picked up a thick, white oak slab, rough, heavy, bark peeling along one edge. He ran one hand across the grain, slow and deliberate. Then he smiled. "Pretty," Garrett laughed. "This," Samuel nodded. "Most beautiful board here." Garrett looked again. It seemed rough, ugly, worthless. "What do you see?" Samuel didn't answer with words. Answer with. He turned the slab into the last of the sunlight. Golden rays hit the surface, and something extraordinary appeared. Rich, swirling grain hidden beneath the rough exterior. Patterns that looked almost alive. "Furniture," Garrett frowned. "Nobody could build with that." Samuel chuckled softly. The tree already did the hard part. Those words would haunt Garrett for years. Not because they were beautiful, because they were true. After Samuel passed away, Garrett inherited more than land. Inside the old woodworking shed, he found hand planes worn smooth from decades of use, cabinet makers' chisels, woodworking books with broken spines, and dozens of notebooks filled with Samuel's handwriting. Some documented furniture designs, others described wood drying techniques, joinery wood, movement, finishing oils, everything a man would need to turn rough timber into something permanent. One sentence appeared repeatedly throughout the notebooks, underlined, circled, written again and again as if Samuel was afraid he might forget his own truth. "Straight boards build houses. Interesting boards build heirlooms. At first it sounded poetic. Eventually it became a business plan. The lumber trucks kept arriving every Thursday, and the oak piles kept growing, and the county kept talking. The jokes started small, a comment here, a grin there, but as the piles grew taller and wider, the laughter grew louder too. It became sport, the kind of entertainment small towns create when they think they've already figured someone out. One Saturday morning at the diner, Dale Harper looked out the window just as Garrett's truck rolled past. He set his coffee down. There he is. Rick looked up. The lumber guy, Dale grinned. The junk collector. Comfortable laughter spread around the room. Not cruel, not mean, just the kind reserved for people everyone believed they'd already understood. One farmer leaned back in his chair. How much firewood you got now? Garrett had just walked in. He smiled politely. Too much. Dale laughed. You planning to heat the entire county? Long pause. The room waited. Garrett looked toward the hills through the window. Something shifted behind his eyes. No. What then? Silence. Every chair seemed to lean forward. Tables. The room didn't just laugh. It erupted. Louder than anything that morning. Louder than anything that month. Forks stopped moving. Coffee cups froze halfway to mouths. Someone nearly choked. Tables? From scrap. Those crooked boards. Garrett simply nodded. He didn't explain. He didn't defend himself. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, calm, as a man who had already seen something the rest of the room hadn't. Nobody believed him. Not a single person in that diner. They would. Nobody believed him. So Garrett decided to stop talking and start proving. The following winter, he opened Samuel's woodworking journals again. Not casually. Not out of curiosity. Out of desperation. He studied every page like a man decoding a map to something only he believed existed. Every evening after the farm work was done, he walked into the workshop and practiced. Dovetails, mortise, and tenon joints, tabletop glue-ups. He worked until his hands ached and his eyes blurred. Then he came back the next night and did it again. Hours became weeks. Weeks became months. The sawdust never left his clothes. The first table looked terrible. Uneven legs, joints that wobbled, a surface that no one would eat dinner on. The second looked slightly less terrible. The third almost stood level. Almost. He didn't quit. He couldn't. Something inside him refused to believe that the wood was wrong. The wood was fine. He was the problem. And problems can be fixed. By table number 15, something changed. Something he couldn't explain. The grain, the character, the live edges, everyone had called defects. They suddenly became beautiful. The flaws stopped being flaws. They became signatures. Garrett stopped seeing scrap. He started seeing stories written in wood by trees that had spent 100 years growing them. One evening, his younger brother Nathan wandered into the workshop unannounced. Wood shavings covered every inch of the floor. Half-finished tables leaned against every wall. Tools lay scattered across the bench. The air smelled like oak and sweat and obsession. Nathan stopped, looked around, then laughed. You're doing it again. Garrett looked up. What? The workshop. Silence. That means you're obsessed. Long pause. Probably. Nathan walked over to a finished tabletop leaning against the far wall. He ran his hand across the smooth oak, slowly, the way their grandfather used to. This came from the pile. Garrett nodded. Thursday's delivery. Nathan looked back toward the fence, toward the mountains of rejected wood that half the county had been laughing about for years. I would have burned it. Garrett smiled. I know. Spring brought the county craft fair. Garrett rented the smallest booth available. One dining table, 2 benches, nothing more, no banner, no brochure, just wood and silence. People stopped. They admired the grain. They ran their fingers across the surface the way people touch things they can't quite believe. They complimented him. They asked questions. They said beautiful things. Nobody bought. The drive home felt long, the kind of long that has nothing to do with distance. Nathan sat beside him in the passenger seat. Neither spoke for miles. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. They liked them. Garrett stared at the road. They didn't buy them. They remembered them. Garrett wasn't convinced, but he went back. The second craft fair produced one sale. A retired couple walked straight to his table, touched the oak, looked at each other, and nodded without a word. They insisted on paying cash. Garrett loaded the dining table into their trailer himself. He stood in the parking lot and watched them drive away. Not because of the money, because for the first time in his life, someone had looked at what he built and wanted it. That feeling was worth more than the check. The orders came slowly after that, painfully slowly. One table, then another, then weeks of nothing, then another. A restaurant asked about larger pieces. A bed and breakfast ordered 6. A local winery requested tasting room furniture. Garrett never advertised, not once. Every single order arrived through someone telling someone else. Word spread quietly the way real things always do. Meanwhile, the lumber trucks kept arriving every Thursday. The piles never seemed smaller. Every load that hit the ground contained another future tabletop, another bench, another possibility that nobody else could see. One humid July afternoon, a furniture designer, traveling through town, stopped at the winery for lunch. He ordered wine. He barely touched it. Instead, he spent nearly 20 minutes studying one of Garrett's oak tables. He crouched down. He looked at the joinery underneath. He ran his palms across the surface. Twice, 3 times, like a man trying to confirm what his hands were telling him. Finally, he called the owner over. "Who made this?" The owner smiled. "Local guy." "Local?" The designer repeated the word like it didn't make sense. "Can I meet him?" 3 days later, the designer arrived at Garrett's workshop. He didn't announce himself loudly. He didn't rush. He walked slowly through the building, examining stacks of drying oak, the homemade drying racks, the hand tools hanging on the walls, the half-finished pieces waiting on every bench. He said very little. His silence said everything. Eventually, he stopped beside one completed dining table, a wide slab of white oak with a live edge that curved like a river. He placed both hands on the surface and held them there. "This isn't scrap wood." Garrett folded his arms. "I know." The designer looked through the window toward the enormous oak piles behind the fence. Mountains of rejected timber stretching across the back pasture. Then he looked back at the table beneath his hands. He did the math no one else had ever bothered to do. "You have enough material here for years." Long pause. "Decades, maybe." Garrett nodded. "Probably." Then the designer asked the question that would change everything, the kind of question that splits a life into before and after. "Have you ever considered selling outside the county?" The question stayed with Garrett all week. It followed him into the workshop. It sat beside him at dinner. It woke him up at night. Until that moment, he hadn't considered it. Not seriously. Every table sold before he finished the next one. Restaurants recommended him. Families waited months for custom pieces. Business felt steady, comfortable, safe. But safe wasn't what Samuel had written about in those notebooks. The designer returned the following week. He stood in the workshop doorway, watching Garrett hand-plane a tabletop. Shavings curled off the blade and floated to the floor. "You know most companies pay thousands for lumber like this." Garrett didn't look up. "I've never paid $1." The designer laughed softly. "That's exactly why you should think bigger." A month later, the designer invited Garrett to a regional furniture exhibition. Garrett nearly refused. The idea felt too big, too far from the workshop, too far from everything he understood. Nathan convinced him with 5 words. "You've got nothing to lose." Garrett loaded 3 dining tables onto a borrowed trailer. One farmhouse table built from a slab the lumber yard had rejected 3 years ago. One modern live-edge design from a board so twisted the mill couldn't even give it away. One traditional trestle table from oak that had sat in the rain behind his fence for an entire winter before he dried it properly. Every single piece came from what everyone else called scrap. The exhibition hall looked like another world. Large furniture companies occupied enormous displays. Professional lighting, elegant branding, teams of salespeople in matching shirts, everything polished, everything expensive, everything designed to make a man with a borrowed trailer feel like he didn't belong. Garrett's booth consisted of 3 tables, a folding chair, a handwritten sign on cardboard. He sat down and expected absolutely nothing. Then, something happened that he did not expect. People stopped. Not 1, not 2, a steady stream. They didn't stop because of the sign, they stopped because of the wood. Something about those tables pulled people in the way beautiful things always do quietly without explanation. Visitors ran their hands across the flowing grain. They crouched down to study the natural edges. They touched the live bark still clinging to one side. They asked the same question over and over. "Where does this oak come from?" Garrett always gave the same answer. "Behind my fence." Most assumed he was joking. He wasn't. By the end of the first day, all 3 tables had sold, every single one. By the second day, Garrett had collected enough business cards to fill an entire notebook. Interior designers, boutique hotel owners, restaurant owners, architects, people who built beautiful spaces for a living and recognized beautiful material when they touched it. One buyer lingered after the others had moved on. She looked at Garrett the way people look at someone they've just decided to take seriously. "Can you produce more?" Garrett hesitated. The workshop was small, the team was him, the equipment was his grandfather's. I think so, she smiled. You'd better be sure. The following year changed everything, quietly, steadily, the way real growth always happens. Garrett expanded the workshop, not into a factory. He refused that word. He built a larger craftsmanship studio, more space, better equipment, proper drying racks that could handle the volume Samuel's notebooks had always described, but Garrett had never needed until now. 3 local woodworkers joined him first. Young men who had spent years framing houses and hanging drywall, but dreamed of building something that would last longer than a mortgage. Then 2 more came. They didn't need convincing. They walked into the workshop, saw the oak touch the grain, and understood immediately what Garrett had been doing alone for years. Every Thursday, the lumber trucks still arrived. Same time, same drivers, same routine. Only now the piles disappeared almost as quickly as they landed. Wood that used to sit for months waiting was now claimed within days. Sorted, stacked, drying, becoming something. One afternoon, the lumberyard manager stopped by. He stood in the doorway, watching Garrett's employees sort a fresh delivery of white oak. He watched for a long time. Then he laughed. You know, we used to pay thousands every month to throw this stuff away. Garrett looked up. I remember. The manager shook his head slowly. And now we're delivering your inventory, for free. The county still didn't fully understand what was happening behind that fence. People noticed more workers coming and going, more trailers, more deliveries. They assumed Garrett had developed a busy woodworking hobby, something between retirement and obsession. The nickname changed, though. He was no longer the junk collector. Now they called him the table guy. They still laughed when they said it. They wouldn't laugh much longer. The jokes continued, smaller now, but still there. One Saturday morning at the diner, Dale Harper looked out the window as another trailer loaded with finished furniture rolled past. He set his coffee down. There goes another table. Rick laughed. How many people need tables? Garrett happened to walk inside just then. The room shifted the way it always did. Not hostile, just curious. The way people watch someone they haven't figured out yet. Dale smiled. Business good. Garrett nodded. Very. Still making tables from garbage. Still. Dale shook his head. I'll never understand it. Garrett smiled politely. You don't have to. He paid for his coffee and left. The room stayed quiet a beat longer than usual. 2 years later, everything accelerated. A photographer from a national home design magazine visited the workshop. He didn't stay an hour. He stayed an entire afternoon. He captured everything. The furniture, the oak piles, the hand tools worn smooth from years of use, the old drying shed Samuel had built decades ago, the grain, the edges, the stories inside every board. He told Garrett the same thing the furniture designer had said years earlier. This isn't scrap. When the article appeared, it spread like fire. Design blogs picked it up first, then interior designers shared it, then furniture buyers across the country started calling. Emails arrived faster than Garrett could open them. The waiting list stretched to 8 months, then 10, then a year. Nathan walked into the office one morning and dropped another stack of orders onto the desk. The pile landed with a sound that echoed. You're going to need help. Garrett stared at the stack. I know. Lots of help, he smiled. I know. The biggest surprise arrived 6 months later, the kind nobody plans for, the kind that separates a workshop from a legacy. An executive from a nationally known furniture retailer requested a visit. Garrett nearly declined. He assumed it was a mistake. Companies that size didn't call men who built tables behind a fence in a county most people couldn't find on a map, but they did. A small team arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 people, quiet, professional. They didn't rush. They spent hours walking through every building. They examined joinery the way doctors examine patients. They watched the sanding process. They studied finishing techniques. They asked questions that told Garrett they understood wood better than most of the county combined. Finally, the lead buyer stopped beside one massive white oak dining table, wide, heavy, a live edge that curved like a coastline. He rested both hands on the surface, closed his eyes briefly, let the grains speak through his fingertips. Then he smiled. This is exactly what we're looking for. Garrett waited. We're launching a collection built around authentic American craftsmanship. Long pause. The rain drummed against the workshop roof. We'd like your tables to be part of it. Silence filled the room. Nathan looked toward Garrett. Garrett looked toward the giant oak piles beyond the window, the same piles the county had laughed about for over a decade. You're serious? The buyer smiled. Very. Negotiations lasted several months. Garrett refused to bend on the things that mattered. Production stays in his hometown, no overseas manufacturing, no particle board, no veneers, every piece solid American white oak, every surface hand-finished, the way Samuel's notebooks described, the way it was always supposed to be done. The retailer agreed to every condition. Orders began the following spring. For the first time, dining tables crafted from discarded oak behind Garrett Hale's fence appeared in beautiful furniture, showrooms across the country. The wood that nobody wanted was now in rooms where everyone wanted to sit. The county still didn't know. Not really, not the full picture. That changed on a Saturday nobody saw coming. Dale Harper and his wife drove to the city to shop for furniture. New dining table. Something nice for the holidays? They wandered through a large home furnishing store. Polished floors, soft lighting, the kind of place that smells like money and good taste. His wife stopped walking, dead still. Dale? What? She pointed. He followed her hand. There it was. A massive live-edge white oak dining table sitting beneath elegant lighting. The grain swirled across the surface like a river frozen in amber. The bark edge curved along one side, raw and beautiful. A small sign sat beside it listing the maker, Garrett Hale Workshop. Dale stepped closer. Read it again, then once more. No, his wife smiled. I think that's your table guy. Dale didn't speak for the entire drive home, not one word. Monday morning, the diner filled earlier than usual. Dale walked in carrying a furniture catalog beneath his arm. He didn't order coffee first. He didn't sit down. He walked straight to the breakfast counter and dropped the catalog down hard enough for the sound to turn heads. He opened it. Beautiful photographs covered the pages. Professional lighting, elegant settings, and right there in the center, impossible to miss, Garrett's dining table. The room went silent, the kind of silent that fills a space when every person in it realizes they've been wrong about the same thing for the same amount of time. Someone in the back whispered, "He built that." Dale nodded slowly. From the lumber piles. Nobody laughed. Nobody said a word. By lunchtime, the entire county knew. That afternoon, the lumberyard manager delivered another truckload of white oak. Only this time, several employees climbed down from the cab. They stood quietly looking toward the workshop. Machines hummed inside. Craftsmen carefully assembled another dining table. Forklifts moved stacked slabs across the yard. Finished furniture waited for shipment to stores most of them had never been inside. One employee shook his head. "We've been throwing away a furniture business for 13 years. The manager smiled quietly. "Looks like we have." One autumn evening, Nathan stood beside Garrett overlooking the property. The familiar oak piles still stretched behind the north fence. Smaller now, but never gone. Beyond them stood the expanded workshop. Delivery trucks loaded finished furniture. Employees locked up for the evening. The smell of fresh-cut white oak drifted through the cool air like a memory that refused to fade. Nathan folded his arms. "You know what still bothers me?" Garrett smiled. "What?" "They called it junk." His voice was quiet. "For years." They laughed. Garrett nodded. "I know." Long silence settled over the farm, the kind that only brothers can share without it feeling empty. Finally, Nathan asked, "So what did Grandpa actually see?" Garrett walked over to the newest delivery. He picked up a rough oak slab, bark still attached, edges twisted. Most people in the county would still call it firewood. He turned it toward the fading sunlight. Golden rays illuminated spectacular swirling grain hidden beneath the rough surface, exactly as Samuel had done all those years before. Garrett smiled. He saw the table hiding inside the tree. For 13 years, the lumberyard believed it was paying to dispose of waste. The county believed Garrett Hale collected scrap. Neighbors saw firewood, crooked boards, worthless cutoffs. The diner saw a joke. The drivers saw a dump site. The workers saw a man wasting his time on something that would never amount to anything. Garrett saw something entirely different: possibility, patience, craftsmanship. Every Thursday, another truck backed up to the fence and unloaded what everyone else had rejected. One board at a time, one table at a time, one customer at a time. This story isn't really about wood. It's about vision, the willingness to see value where others see nothing, the patience to keep working when nobody believes in what you're building, the discipline to let time do what shortcuts never could. Most people spend their lives waiting for perfect materials, perfect timing, perfect conditions. Garrett built a business from what the world threw away, not because the wood was special, because he decided it was. The greatest value isn't created by finding better materials. It's created by seeing what everyone else has already decided isn't worth seeing. And the greatest lives aren't built from what comes easy. They're built from what others abandoned, picked up by someone stubborn enough to believe it still had a future. The lumber trucks still arrive every Thursday, 7:30 in the morning. The wood still hits the ground behind the north fence. And Garrett still walks out, every single time, because he knows something most people never learn. There's no such thing as worthless material, only unfinished vision.